Much for joining us today. It is indeed an honor and a privilege to have such an esteemed and accomplished panel of women join us to share Africa Day 2021. Today we mark this special occasion with a discussion that brings us back to 1963, when the organization that we now know as the Africa Union was founded. This day is meant to commemorate the struggles that led to Africa's liberation movement and all the progress the continent has made since then. Africa Day provides a platform to recognize the path our African partners took and are taking to become the newest frontier for investment, innovation, and culture. According to the UN, 3 of every 4 people added to the continent, 3 of 4 people of every 4 people added to the continent will total the human population between now and the end of the century. Every one of them will be African. And a third of the human population will be African by the year 2100. Africa's population is becoming more urban and adopting new technologies at a rapid rate. Entrepreneurs all over the continent are finding new ways to bring sustainable energy to urban and rural populations, and goods and services are in high demand. In an opinion piece I authored over a month ago, I made a point to highlight how important it is for the United States to continue strengthening economic ties with our African partners. We share a long-standing relationship with Africa, but we can and should do more to open the door for American investment on the continent of Africa. And I believe that door is opening. American tech companies are launching hubs in major cities throughout Africa, and African entrepreneurs and entertainers are making their presence known in the United States and beyond. More importantly, the African diaspora in the United States is fast becoming an important source of that connectivity. Now, with all of this in mind, we cannot dismiss the challenges that our African partners still face on a daily basis. There are real threats to human security in certain parts of the continent, some man-made, some natural disasters. But we have a responsibility to step up and support whenever and wherever we can, in the spirit of diplomacy, cooperation, and mutual respect. Taking that balanced and fair-minded approach to our relationship with Africa ensures that the United States, in turn, remains true to its values. As we emerge from this COVID-19 pandemic, the disparities between the most and the least developed countries in the world have become crystal clear. Our guest today will tell you that more than ever, the United States and the international community must step up to support Africa at this trying time. The United States is stepping up to expand support for vaccine production in Africa, which is designed to help address the effects of the current pandemic and prepare our partners for future pandemics. As chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, I'm committed to finding those opportunities to advance policies that strengthen America's standing in the international community and ensure that the United States remains seated at the table with our African partners. Keeping that seat at the table is critical to protecting our national security interests and to working with African countries to protect theirs. Also, to ensure that we build a strong, mutually beneficial economic relationship. So I thank you, and I now turn to our ranking member of the Africa Global Health and Human Rights Subcommittee, Chris Smith, for his opening remarks.
Thank you so very much, Chairman Meeks, for holding this Africa Day Roundtable and for your leadership on these issues. And a very special welcome to the distinguished leaders who join us today. I also want to recognize my good friend and colleague, Chairwoman Bass of the Africa Global Health, Global Human Rights Subcommittee. It's an honor to work with her in a bipartisan way to advance a strong U.S. Africa policy. As the chairman mentioned, today marks the anniversary of the founding of the African Union in 1963. Today is a chance to celebrate the rich diversity, culture, entrepreneurship, and opportunity that exists across sub-Saharan Africa. It is also an opportunity to reaffirm the strategic partnership between the United States and the African continent on shared values as well as priorities. In Congress, Africa policy has enjoyed strong bipartisan engagement and support for decades. Successful initiatives championed by both Republican and Democratic administrations, such as George W. Bush's President Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, or PEPFAR, and the President's Malaria Initiative, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, Feed the Future. We know that if good supplementation and food is provided to mothers during their pregnancy, during the first 1,000 days of life, beginning with conception to the second birthday, that not only are children stronger, the moms are stronger, the families are stronger, and many diseases are mitigated, as well as other problems affiliated with lack of supplementation and lack of good food. So Feed the Future has been instrumental in the first 1,000 days in saving so many lives, including ending, where it is done, stunting. And then there's the Young African Leaders Initiative. Karen Bass has worked so very hard on that. Prosper Africa, Power Africa. All of these have saved millions of lives and supported efforts to create jobs and spur economic growth. Prior to the economic downturn caused by COVID-19, some of the fastest growing economies in the world are and continue to be in Africa, with a growing number of middle-class consumers. This is untapped potential and an opportunity, frankly, for American businesses as well, to create those partnerships, to create those lines of exchange. The U.S. must support companies looking to invest overseas, particularly in Africa, and do more to strengthen commercial ties on the continent. Yes, we've got AGOA, but we need to do far more than that important initiative. The U.S. also plays an important role in supporting good governance and democratic values on the continent. While there's been a number of recent bright spots, including significant democratic progress, there's also been, in areas, serious human rights violations, political opposition, and disturbing trend of modifying constitution to stay longer in power. We must continue to work with countries to combat corruption and respect for human rights. And one of the issues that I work on every day of the week, human trafficking, we need to continue to work with our African partners to ensure that women are not enslaved through sex trafficking and children, and that through forced labor as well, that all these terrible crimes, and they are worldwide, but they're also in Africa, are combated very, very rigorously. While Africa is a continent full of opportunity, there are also challenges. We need, we look at conflicts and we see the problem of displacement and humanitarian need. It's not just Boko Haram and some of the other groups, ISIS and Al-Qaeda affiliates are growing in strength and numbers on the continent. We've had hearings and we've had a focus on the Fulani, which are doing terrible things as well. China and Russia, as we all know, continue to support malign activity, and they undermine freedoms of expression and human rights and promote a bad governance model as well. The COVID-19 pandemic is only exacerbating these challenges. The U.S. continues to be the largest donor by far, something I think all of us on both sides of the aisle here in the United States are very proud of. But we must do a better job of messaging and communicating the sustained U.S. commitment to the people and the communities we seek to support. As the continent continues to grapple with the devastating impacts of COVID-19, the U.S. and our partners must leverage existing investments in global health across Africa to facilitate vaccine distribution and to support health systems responding to this pandemic. Again, Greg, Chairman Meeks, thank you so much for pulling us all together, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ranking Member Smith. Now we'll turn to the Chairwoman of the Africa Global Health and Human Rights Subcommittee, my friend Karen Bass, for her opening remarks.
First of all, as always, let me thank the chairman for his leadership and the ranking member. The idea that the full committee would hold a day to celebrate, commemorate, and acknowledge U.S. ties with the continent of Africa, I think was a wonderful idea. And as the anniversary of the African Union, I've had the opportunity on several occasions, along with my colleague Chris Smith, the ranking member, we have visited the African Union. We've been there for opening session, which I think is always a day to me to stand in awe, to see all of the leaders of the continent of Africa come together, and to know that the slogan of the African Union, trade, not aid, is something that I believe we want to focus US policy on, trade and investment, and change the way the United States has interacted with the continent of Africa. We will need to be aligned, like a lot of other countries around the world that view the continent of Africa as a partner, as an investment partner, a business partner, and not view the continent of Africa as a place where we need to deliver charity. And that is something that the African Union has called for, and I definitely stand in support of. And I think the ranking member and the chair gave several examples of initiatives that begin to shift the paradigm from how we have done foreign aid traditionally, more toward an investment. And let me just take the opportunity also to say that as the continent of Africa struggles with COVID, and I know that India was going to play a big role in terms of delivering vaccines, that now that is a gap that the world needs to step up. The United States taking the lead with other countries and continents around the world to make sure that COVID does not take over the African continent and that the outcome there is stronger and better. We want to make sure that it doesn't send the economies backwards. Let me also thank the witnesses. First of all, President Johnson Sirleaf, who is someone that I consider a mentor and a friend who I have gotten to know. We did election observation together in Zimbabwe, and just watching her leadership, not just in Liberia, not just on the continent of Africa, but in the world. And it's wonderful to see you today, and thank you so much for participating. And it's an opportunity for me to publicly congratulate Dr. Okonjo-Iweala for your appointment to the WTO. How many conversations about this appointment? And it is so exciting to see you take the lead in that organization, and we look forward to working together. And I also want to thank the other panelists for the opportunity to hear from you today. So thank you very much. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chairwoman Bass. And I'll now introduce the witnesses. And just listening to you, Chairwoman Bass, and just maybe to make one comment, I can see in heaven now, former member of Congress, Donald Payne, looking down at us, so proud that you've continued his work as chair of the subcommittee, and I'm doing what I'm doing as chairman of the committee because of all of his work and his dreams for the continent of Africa. So it is my honor to introduce Her Excellency, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who is the former president of Liberia, the first woman democratically elected as head of state on the continent of Africa, and a Nobel Laureate. President Johnson Sirleaf led Liberia through reconciliation and recovery following the nation's decade-long civil war, as well as through the Ebola crisis of 2014. And during her presidency, she focused on rebuilding the country and attracted over $16 billion in foreign direct investment. Recognized as a global leader for women's empowerment, President Sirleaf received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2011. Her many honors also include the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the Grande Cross of the Legion of Honor, France's highest public distinction, and being named one of Forbes' 100 most powerful women in the world. Last year, President Johnson Sirleaf was named as co-chair of an independent panel appointed by the World Health Organization to review its coordination of the COVID-19 pandemic response. We are very honored that we have her joining us today. I now turn to Her Excellency, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, for her opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairman Meeks. It's a great pleasure to join you and the honorable members of the House Foreign Affairs Committee today. I congratulate you on your ascendancy to this important position. And I know that many join me in expressing our appreciation for your decades of experience in foreign policy and the approach you have always adopted for relations between the United States and the world. 5 decades ago, on May 25th, the Organization of African Unity was established. Today, as we mark Africa Day, we celebrate a continent that had withstood the debilitating effect of the slave trade, colonialism, the ravages of internal conflicts, and the rampant exploitation of its natural resources. We celebrate Africa in all of its rich culture, resources, resilience, youthful energy, and ancient wisdom. We celebrate that the continent of Africa, diverse in its 54 very different countries, can take pride in its achievements, resisting being treated as a mass with a low complexity and as a junior on the global stage. We also take pride that our land, the second largest and most populous in the continent with 1.4 billion people, possess a large percentage of the world's strategic mineral resources, one of the richest biodiversity of trees, plants, animals, and birds. Our 16% of the world's population also has many young people who are well educated and eager to take responsibility and leadership. My message today is about an Africa that is claiming its rightful place in the world. Our long-term vision, Africa 2063, is firmly aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, and our African Continental Free Trade Agreement has the potential to boost inter-Africa trade by over 50% by rationalizing import duties. This will expand our collective market size and position Africa for more effective global competition. AfCFTA is good news for women who have been the foundation of the critical informal economy. Our message today is one of an Africa determined to take charge of its own future, to be self-reliant and self-defining. There will be some who will suggest I am painting too rosy a picture. I don't believe so. I know from my own experience in Liberia that with a clear and hopeful vision, progress can be made. I'm aware that quality governance is uneven in Africa, that some countries are afflicted by conflict and extremism. I know that some countries suffer from undercapacitation and that the road is respected and prosperous will not be easy. But I know it is fully possible and has benefits for the world. When he addressed the Ghanaian Parliament in 2009, President Obama reminded the people of Africa that the world would no longer have the great men of the past who would transform the continent. The future of all our countries in the hands of the young people, brimming with talent and energy and hope, who can claim the future that so many in our generation never realized. Of course, today, the president would have to say, great men and great women. Our Ghanaian President, Nana Akufo-Addo, words also resonate with young people when he says that after 60 years of independence, Africa no longer has any excuse for being poor, that with proper use of Africa's rich natural resources, we should no longer require and depend on overseas development assistance. The only other point is that Africa is not immune to global trends. And if global forces seek to disempower Africa, it could make Africa's effort more difficult. Honorable members, COVID-19 has become a game changer. It has gripped the world with a cruel hand, exposing long-standing nationalism, populism, and isolationism that have proved challenging to democratic cultures, global collaboration, and trust in multilateralism. It has also exposed global inequities, injustices, and marginalization. The George Floyd story is but one example of deep-seated racism laid bare. The people of the world now call for change. The call first is to overcome the pandemic that is still active and mutating faster than we can keep up. This makes it clear that there has to be solidarity and cooperation between nations, that it is not possible of putting a fence around poor countries to prevent the spread of the virus to richer ones. We are all interconnected. The inequities of what has been termed as vaccine apartheid must stop. The richer countries which have the resources and the vaccine manufacturing facilities and who have vaccinated large percentage of their population must allocate their surplus vaccine to poorer countries, the COVAX facility. Moreover, they are called upon to support waiver of manufacturer licenses and intellectual property agreement and the transfer of knowledge and technology to facilitate the manufacture of vaccine in the South. In this regard, we applaud the Biden-Harris administration's recent announcement of donations of large amount of surplus vaccines to countries in need, and their nod to lifting temporarily restrictive patents on vaccines to allow manufacturing in several countries closer to their needs, some in Africa. We also applaud the private sector of African entrepreneurs who have been part of the effort that established the COVAX platform. They have worked with South Africa to negotiate with Johnson & Johnson for the manufacture of vaccine in Africa, the first batch being ready for distribution, I'm told, just about now. COVID-19 also has had a devastating effect on African economies, in particular related to Africa's debt. The immediate step is to take heed of the call of the United Nations Economic Commission of Africa for the reallocation of special drawing rights at the International Monetary Fund, thereby supporting countries to keep their economies on track. Our Director General of the World Trade Organization, our dear sister, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, who speaks next, is the better person to address you on all aspects of these and other issues relating to African development. Members of the House, all that what I've said is good, but not enough. Africa's economic progress can be found in the spirit of collaboration and a more equal partnership. Let me put it bluntly. The United States needs a compact with Africa. The United States needs upon that which has already been invested in Africa. A compact that sets out equal benefits and responsibility, one that is grounded in the private sector with a view to attract private capital and private investment that will promote private entrepreneurship, that will foster manufacturing that creates jobs for our young people. Germany and Africa have a compact, and there's no reason why the United States cannot do likewise, of course, in its own way, according to its own policies. I do not have a blueprint, a roadmap for this suggestion, but my many years of public service at all levels of governance tell me that until we shift the priorities in Africa, until we move the focus from the public to the private sector, Africa's increased economic performance and growth will remain the domain of a few countries, and Africa's call for overall self-reliance and independence will be a pipe dream. Let me conclude, Mr. Chairperson, by saying that the African-American community in the United States has a special connection and position in Africa's new prosperity. We call for stronger ties, a reconnection. The Black communities in the diaspora are integrally linked to the mother continent. Their strength, their search for true equality is enhanced by a strong Africa, a competitive Africa that has a strong voice in global affairs. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Thank you so much. And now I have the pleasure of introducing Her Excellency, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. She is the first African-American woman to serve as Director General of the World Trade Organization, a global finance expert, an economist, and an international development professional with over 30 years of experience working in Asia, Africa, Europe, Latin America, and North America. She was recently named the African Union Special Envoy to mobilize international finance support to combat COVID-19. Dr. Okonjo was the first woman to serve as Nigeria's finance minister from 2003 to 2006 and 2011 to 2015, and as foreign minister in 2006. As a development economist and finance minister, she steered her country through various financial and trade reforms. She worked for 25 years at the World Bank and as a development economist, rising to the #2 position of Managing Director of Operations. I now turn to Her Excellency, Dr. Okonjo-Iweala, for her opening remarks.
Well, thank you so much, Chairman Meeks. And like my older sister, President Johnson Sirleaf, who I'm so delighted to follow, let me also commend wonderful leadership of this committee. Ranking Member McCall, Africa Subcommittee Chair, Representative Karen Bass, my dear sister, thank you so much for your warmth and your support and solidarity. Ranking Member Smith, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to join your Africa Day celebrations and as I said, to follow on my sister, President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, such an example for all of us. Thank you for inviting me to join you and to share my thoughts about strengthening U.S. Africa ties in the years ahead. Thank you also for your championing of Africa trade, for AGOA, for investment into Africa. We've just heard Africa needs investment more than aid. Africans want to be masters of their and mistresses of their own destiny. As the DG of WTO, I fully want to support what Representative Karen Bass said, trade, not aid for Africa. Right before the pandemic in January 2020, the African Development Bank looked at the continent's economy and concluded, and I quote, "The outlook for the continent continues to brighten." The 3.4% real GDP growth in 2019 was projected to accelerate to 3.9% in 2020 and 4.1% in 2021. 6 of the world's 10 fastest growing economies were in Africa: Rwanda, Ethiopia, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Tanzania, and Benin. Governance and accountability were improving, and despite concerns about the erosion of political and legal rights, the Mo Ibrahim Foundation estimated that in 2019, 61% of Africa's population lived in a country where overall governance was better than in 2010. Economic fundamentals were getting stronger, with rising export orientation and investment in sectors like telecommunications, retail, in addition to minerals. But I don't want to overstate things. We all know the challenges. Growth was uneven across regions and unequal within many countries. Climate change was a growing economic threat and still is, particularly to the agricultural sector. Conflict and fragility still characterize several countries, as has been mentioned earlier. Building human capital and creating more jobs in higher productivity sectors were challenges for governments across the continent. On balance, though, the continent was doing well. Now, COVID-19 has thrown Africa into recession for the first time in 25 years. The IMF estimates that output in sub-Saharan Africa contracted by almost 2% in 2020. And the World Bank estimates that up to 40 million people have been pushed into extreme poverty on the continent, reversing a multi-year downward trend. Per capita output in sub-Saharan Africa is not expected to return to pre-pandemic levels until after 2022, and in many countries, not before 2025. And the downturn has led to rising debt distress. All this may seem daunting, but in every adversity, there is opportunity. Prompt international coordination to make vaccine access equitable and accessible to Africa is really a fundamental for recovery. I hope that the debate going on in my institution on IP waivers and transfer of technology to enable Africa manufacture its own vaccines, as well as other emerging markets and developing countries in the world. I hope that will come to a good, pragmatic conclusion very soon with benefits to all sides. Investing in speeding up Africa's recovery from the pandemic is an opportunity to do well while doing good, given the potential to create jobs and reduce poverty while earning attractive rates of return. The continent-wide growth figures high differentiated performances across countries and regions. For instance, in 2021, the IMF projects 7.6% growth in Kenya, 6.9% in Niger, 6% in Cote d'Ivoire and the Gambia, and 5.7% in Rwanda, just to name a few bright spots. The continent has many positive fundamentals that make it attractive for investment. First, demographics. Congressman Meeks referred to this. Sub-Saharan Africa's population is young and growing, set to double by 2050, even as other parts of the world grow older and see their populations begin to shrink. 60% of Africans are under the age of 25. If these young people can be productively employed, Africa will become a driver of global growth. Second, resources. President Johnson Sirleaf said it, Africa's mineral assets are underexploited and often unmapped. And the continent has so much, 60% of the world's uncultivated arable land. Third, the entrepreneurial dynamism and connectivity of the young people is evident. The International Telecommunications Union estimates that 40% of Africans aged 15 to 24 use the internet, compared to 29% for the population overall. Fourth, trade and regional integration. The African Continental Free Trade Agreement is creating a consumer market of 1.3 billion people, which should help attract investment. Integration offers investors potential for greater economies of scale, productivity, growth, and international competitiveness, including taking full advantage of the opportunities offered by AGOA. Infrastructure is a big part of making the most of continental integration, and I want to recognize the work on electricity being done by the USAID-led Power Africa program. Fifth, profitability. Africa offers higher rates of return on foreign direct investment than any region other than East and Southeast Asia, according to figures from UNCTAD. McKinsey observed before the pandemic that large companies in Africa, those with over $1 billion in revenues, have tended to grow faster and be more profitable than their peers elsewhere. Their research has pointed to 6 sectors as particularly promising: wholesale and retail, food and agri-processing, healthcare, financial services, including fintech, and of course, light manufacturing and construction. On healthcare, I would add that the pandemic has revealed investment opportunities for US businesses in pharmaceuticals. Africa imports 90% of its pharmaceuticals and 99% of its vaccines. The continent no longer finds it acceptable and is ready to partner with domestic and foreign investors to build a pharmaceutical industry. In closing, I want to tell you a story that illustrates the potential of US Africa economic ties. Back in 2015, 2 Lagos-based entrepreneurs realized that Nigerian merchants were struggling to accept payments from home and abroad via credit card, debit card, mobile money, and direct bank transfer. They founded Paystack, a fintech company that tried to connect the different segments of the country's financial sector. It worked well. They managed to cut the number of steps for businesses to accept payments from 7 to 2. Then they won seed funding from Y Combinator, the renowned Silicon Valley accelerator. They expanded to Ghana and South Africa. And last fall, they sold Paystack to Stripe, a US-based company, for $200 million. Stripe will use Paystack to make inroads into the African market. This is a story of Africa being in the present and marching into the future. It is time for US investors to emulate Y Combinator and Stripe and take a deeper look at the African market. Perceptions of risk are more pronounced than actual risk. and guarantee instruments can help and should be arranged by the the International Development Finance Corporation. Other investors have moved into Africa. Between 2000 and 2019, Chinese entities, both public and private, made loans worth $153 billion to Africa, according to the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Between 2000 and 2015, China Exim Bank alone channeled $63 billion to Africa, much of it for physical infrastructure. The figure for the U.S. Exim Bank was $1.7 billion. U.S. investors need to wake up and act fast, because if you're not in Africa, you're not in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you so very much. I now have the pleasure to introduce Her Excellency Rama Yade. Ambassador Rama Yade is Director of the Atlantic Council's Africa Center and Senior Fellow for the Europe Center. She's also a Professor of African Affairs at Mohammed VI Polytechnic University in Morocco, and since 2017 at Sciences Po in Paris. Ambassador Yade has over a decade of experience working in European and international politics. At the early age of 30, she was appointed as the Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs and Human Rights of the Republic of France, the first ever French Minister for Human Rights and the first woman of African descent to become a member of the French cabinet. In 2010, Ambassador Yade was appointed as the Ambassador of France to UNESCO. I now turn to Her Excellency, Ambassador Rama Yade, for her opening remarks.
Hello, thank you. Thank you, Chairman Gregory Meeks. It's an honor and a privilege to share this panel with you. Even if the house is virtual today, this invitation comes from the house and it means a lot to me. I have been in Washington, D.C. since a few months now. And Chairman Meeks, I already know you are a friend of Africa and Africans. You are very well known on the continent, and at the Atlantic Council, we hope to host you one day. Mrs. President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, first African woman to be elected as president. We know as Africans, as African women, we know the tremendous legacy you left, not only for African people, but also for the world. Thank you for that. And Mrs. Ngozi, you did great as DG of the World Trade Organization. You are a fantastic role model, and African hopes are on your shoulders since trade ran an important part of the world. And as newly appointed director of the Africa Center at the Atlantic Council, I modestly try to change the narrative for Africa. But with you, we hope the rules will be changed. So allow me just to say first, that day is not only about Africa Day celebrations. This day sadly marks the 1 year anniversary of death of George Floyd, belonging to the French diaspora, African diaspora. From Paris and from Dakar, people like me missed nothing from this tragedy, and that means a lot for all of us. As you know, I am not an American. I'm not here to promote US or European leadership in Africa, but to encourage, to support win-win partnerships, which is, believe me, much more rentable at long term. Today, while the world celebrates the founding of the Organization of African Unity, for which Haile Selassie said, may this convention of union last 1,000 years, Chairman Meeks, you choose to focus on African innovation. It's a terrific idea, and I would like to take this opportunity to speak about culture, and don't tell me it's so French, culture and African creative industries, But what I will try to bring in the debate in Washington under my directorship at the Atlantic Council is to make the world understand that, it is about the African soft power. And the soft power, it is the new hard power. Cultural industry is a tremendous asset for Africa. Fashion, films, visual arts, cultural sites, media, design, video games, entertainment, music, even sports. Right now in Kigali, in Rwanda, the NBA is launching the African Basketball League. Africa is experiencing an exceptional cultural bubbling. And African cultural soft power has always existed, though. It is to the African heritage that we owe blues, salsa, rap, reggae, and even disco. The same goes for Picasso's painting, the pyramids of Egypt, to the sculptures of ancient Greece. All about this is about African culture. And on fashion, Dior to Vuitton, luxury is renewed by African inspirations. Beyonce's Disney-produced musical Black is a King is a celebration of Africa. Black Panther also, and Netflix. At the same time, Nigerian artists, Burna Boy, Davido, Wizkid, they are awarded at Hollywood, and there is a bridge to build between Nollywood and Hollywood. The problem is, and that is the challenge here, culture in the African continent, it's only 1% of the GDP. That's not enough, This culture is driven by demography, the youngest population in the world, technology, the biggest digital market these 2 last decades. Women have an important role. It's about tourism. It's about all this, but it's about the universal message of African people in the world, but it's only 1% of GDP. That's why I think that if we can be helpful here, is maybe to put culture at the heart, in the heart of the US foreign policy, and to build that bridge beyond the Atlantic between Africa and America. And I should say, in Americas, because all this is about the Caribbean, it's about Brazil, it's about South American and everything. And we can support this largely underfunded industry. What is an opportunity here is that 2021 is the choice of the African Union to promote arts, culture, and heritage. And that is a very good opportunity to have this mission together on the field of innovation, of cultural innovation. So I'm going to stop there because there would be so many things to say about this when we speak about culture and innovation on the African continent. But that was my message today. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so very much, Ambassador. We very much. I'd now like to introduce Ms. Isis Nyong'o Madison. She's a principal at Asphalt Ink and serves as a senior advisor with the Albright Stonebridge Group. She advises a global client base of corporations, foundations, and investors on developing and implementing their Africa strategies. Isis held prominent leadership positions at Google, Mobi, and MTV Network, leading their Africa entry strategies. Ms. Isis also co-founded Women Work in 2017. She co-founded Women Work in 2017 with partners with global donors and local corporations to implement programs that increase access to capital and business skills for thousands of women-owned businesses across the continent of Africa. She's been named as one of the top 40 women under 40 in Kenya for several years and shortlisted on the Forbes top 20 youngest power women in Africa. The World Economic Forum selected her as a young global leader in 2012. I now turn to Ms. Isis Nyong'o Madison for her opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairman Meeks, Ranking Member Smith, Africa Subcommittee Chairwoman Karen Bass, and all the honorable members here today. I am so honored to be on this panel with women I admire incredibly and have enjoyed really listening to them and their perspectives, which has been incredible. One might be mistaken in thinking that today is Africa Women's Day and not Africa's Day, given this really powerful all-female panel. And it's something that wouldn't have happened a couple years ago. And to me, it's a very significant moment because it kind of underscores a shift happening on the continent where the investments made in improving gender equality and access to education are really paying off. Thank you for having me here to share my perspective of how to strengthen U.S. and Africa ties. I myself am a kind of reflection of U.S. Africa ties. My mother is from Michigan and my father is from Kenya, and I was raised in both places, very fortunate to have had that experience. I live in Nairobi now, and I've dedicated my career 20 plus years really to the advancement of Africa. As you had noted, I'm a principal at Asphalt Ink and a senior advisor to ASG. I work with global clients that run the gamut of foundations to corporations who either starting or extending their engagements in Africa. And prior to that, at my time at Google and MTV, which I consider, and I loved what Ambassador Yade was saying about the creative industry, but I really consider both Google and MTV to be some of the most innovative American companies. And the impact that they've had over the last 15 years in really building incredibly growing industries in terms of technology and creative is amazing. I think having kind of firsthand experience with the power of US private sector investment in Africa and how it can really transform industries just makes me so excited about all the possibilities that we have today. As we know, we have a very large market, 1 billion people, some of the fastest, as noted, growing economies in the world still. And this rapidly urbanizing continent is vibrant. We have very knowledgeable young people that really make up a very large part of our consumer base here. Africa, the way I see it, Africa is really ready for a more strategic relationship, I think, with the US, particularly with the private sector, in addressing pressing issues beyond infrastructure. I think infrastructure has had a lot of focus for good reasons, but really two areas that I wanted to talk about, which I think are also quite important, particularly from a job creation perspective, is first the digital economy, given that this is such a strength of the US. And as it has been noted, this tech industry, and it's really been in my own career to see this flourish, but really the rapid growth here, and we're talking about give or take $1 billion of private investment are going into early stage startups and the high growth sector, not to mention all the investment that's going into the infrastructure for the tech world, including the undersea cables, the telco networks. And the US, as has also been noted earlier, has been visible. American venture capital firms, strategic investors, accelerators have been engaging, and they've been deploying capital. And I loved what Honorable Okonjo-Iweala said about Paystack, because that's such an amazing, for so long, there was questions of, will there be exits? How are we going to really benefit? I mean, those are the stories you heard again and again. And for that exit to happen last year, particularly during COVID, was such an important moment for the continent, for the investors, many of whom were American, but also to create a bigger angel investment community, because that's such a critical part to the early stage of developing, and to have people exit and be able to become angel investors, I think is just another great testament. The tech industry does have more absorptive capacity, and this is where I think the US can certainly invest more from DFC or to really encourage, which has also been doing early stage deals announced last year, which was great to see, and eager to see what Prosper Africa will also be focusing on. And really quite important that capital is put in the hands of local entrepreneurs and local fund managers. The second area that is quite important from a job creation perspective is the SME sector. SMEs are really the growth engine of the continent and account for upwards of 80% of the private sector jobs. And the challenge SMEs have, though, is the access to capital is even harder than it is for larger corporations. This has been exacerbated during COVID, and particularly very close to what's happening with women-led businesses. Women-led businesses face different types of gender-based barriers that also hinder growth. So I think that the U.S. Africa trade, which has been, I think, more focused on large corporations, is really an opportunity to expand into SMEs. USADF has been doing, I think, great work on social enterprises, particularly in agriculture and women-led businesses, looking at how can you scale that up and how can you look at the mandates of DFC and other entities to really look at the SMEs segment. So in closing, at this opportune time, I think it's also been mentioned about the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement and AGOA, but it's so important that there's this alignment between bilateral, regional, and the continental frameworks and agreements in pursuing, fostering a much stronger partnership. And I really look forward to the rest of this conversation and for your attention right now. Thank you. Thank you so very much. I'm now going to turn to the questions portion of the agenda. Now, let me say outright, Dr. President Sirleaf and Director General Okonjo-Iweala told me earlier that they had commitments today, but chose to still come on to speak. And I thought their contribution to today was so powerful that we will keep them and have them for whatever and however long that they can stay, understanding that they have prior commitments. So y'all just let me know when you have to leave. But we appreciate the powerful words that you delivered today. I thought your words were important, and this thank you so much for giving us the time that you have thus far and that you can, but clearly understand your prior commitments, and we look forward to having you again. So let me ask my first question. It's no accident that all of you are here. 4 powerful and distinguished group of women. And your presence here alone sends a powerful, powerful message about empowering women in Africa. Gender equality is an important part of improving the economies of the African countries, because where there is equality, there is growth. So my question is, what do you see as the major obstacles and major benefits to gender equality as a driver of economic growth? 2, Madam President, I know we've got a limited time, or Madam Director, or any one of the women.
Maybe it would be good for Her Excellency to go first.
I'm trying to mute.
You're unmuted now.
All right. Yeah, let me start first. I think, first of all, the long-standing stereotyping of women. The fact that women have been regarded as sort of a secondary sex, the misogyny, the domination of men have prevented women from, first of all, being able to rise up through education, through technical training, and to claim leadership at all levels in society. So that self-restraint, because sometimes politics is a dirty game and women don't want to engage in that. But all of that is changing. And the main thing now is for men to recognize the equality, the competitiveness, the capacity of women as equals, whether we do it through laws, through quotas, through constitutional changes, through policies. We need men to now take a stand for equality for their wives, their daughters, and all the women who have broken the barriers already. Some have claimed leadership, but the numbers are still too small. The percentages still far below that is required for equity. So those are my first comments.
Thank you. Let me ask Dr. Okonjo-Iweala, you know, I've long supported increasing investment in African markets, which are diverse and increasingly they're technologically driven. With Africa home to the largest, and this is what we talked about, the youngest population in the world, education and skills development will be the key to capturing this market. So how can the United States enhance its efforts to increase educational and exchange opportunities for African youth at home and abroad?
Thank you, Congressman Meeks. That's a really important point, because one of the things we have to pay attention to is human capital development. And I'm afraid that many of our countries find themselves on the lower end of the human capital index that is put out by the World Bank and the United Nations. And this pandemic, I think, has also caused, I would say, some more harm to education all over the world, but particularly on the continent and particularly for girls. So we're just hoping that we won't be taken so far behind where we were. So the issue is, you know, how can the US help, and what more can it do? I think we need to look at it from a couple of perspectives. Getting access to education is a very serious issue in many parts of the continent, particularly for girls. So the issue is, how do we partner with government to increase that access? How do we start from a very early age? From early childhood education is very, very important. If you can catch children when they're that young, in the first 1,000 days, as one of the Congress people said, you're really going to make a difference. So partnering for early childhood education, giving access to primary education, that is all very, very important. And targeting girls in particular is crucial. The economics of getting girls in school is very well known, so I don't need to go into that. There's also the other thing that the US can think about is investment in education. A lot of children in our countries go to private schools because the public sector alone cannot cope. So there's scope for US investors to look at that in partnership perhaps with the a lot of African investors are also investing in education. And finally, I want to say that the pandemic has shown that digital is possible. Of course, we have a problem because many of our children don't have access to, they don't have electricity, they don't have access to the internet. But where this is possible, we should also think of this as a means of reaching those who cannot be reached. So how can the US help expand and invest in infrastructure on the continent? The Power Africa initiative, helping to expand into renewable energy and areas that can be more commonly used by people in rural areas and in urban slums. And then financing digital to make access better for children, especially girls. Those are just a few ideas of how the US can get engaged.
Thank you for that. My time has expired. I now turn to Ranking Member Smith for his question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to this very distinguished panel for their insights and challenges. President Johnson Sirleaf, thank you for your extraordinary message of hope, and with an emphasis on the remaining challenges, especially those posed by COVID-19. And I think, you know, just picking up with the last speaker about the first 1,000 days, that is among the most transformational initiatives, low cost, from conception to the second birthday, food security, supplementation. If it's done, and it's done aggressively, as we all know, as some of the countries around the world have done, including in sub-Saharan Africa, the cognitive abilities of children are not stymied by that lack of nutrition. And they do far better. Their immune systems are stronger, and they not only survive, they thrive. So thank you for bringing additional emphasis to that. You know, just let me on the COVID-19, if I could, you know, in 2020, and my good friend and colleague, Karen Bass, chaired a hearing on this, and I joined her at that hearing on the impacts of COVID on Africa. And we know that about 3.5% of the world's cases, according to the African Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, was in sub-Saharan Africa, with fewer deaths than other parts of the world. Robust containment and a younger population were among the factors, but the emergence of variants that are more transmissible and deadly has now resulted in a fatality rate in 2021 that is above the global average. And I think WHO put out a number that about 85,800 deaths have occurred in Africa. But the big concern is, as in everywhere else, as we're seeing in India, does that number now, because of variants, begin to significantly increase? As I think was mentioned by President Sirleaf, Johnson Sirleaf, the problem with India not providing its vaccines, COVAX, for example, because they have to use it domestically for their crisis, puts additional pressure and needed pressure on us and others to make sure those vaccines are available. It becomes a supply issue. Where is the supply? I saw one number that 1% of the 1.3 million vaccines given globally have been administered in Africa. That has got to change. Just parenthetically, Dr. Francis Collins, the head of the National Institutes of Health, credited President Trump with warp speed, which, as President Johnson Sirleaf said, the importance of partnership, private and public sector. We wouldn't have not had a vaccine for maybe up to 5 years. And the way Dr. Collins put it was just breathtaking that it was done within a matter of months and not years. Again, working with Pfizer and the other pharmaceutical houses as part of Operation Warp Speed. That work continues under President Biden. And now the issue is dissemination of those vaccines. And if you could just maybe put a finer point on how important it is that those vaccines be disseminated quickly and effectively. I see, according to WHO, some of the countries are having trouble with having the financing. The cold chain is always an issue, which is why the J&J vaccine, which does not require extreme cold in terms of that supply chain, cold chain, so it makes it easier to disseminate the vaccine. But if you can speak to that even further, because I know my colleagues here in the United States are very concerned that all of a sudden we could see a major spike among the elderly and the other at-risk populations in Africa. If you could speak to that, I appreciate it.
Well, let me try, and then Ngozi can come in. First of all, the issue of supply.
Yeah.
Clearly, there's not enough of it. And the target set on a COVAX, 20% of the Africa population were the targeted group to get vaccines. Our own ambition was to get 60% of our population vaccinated. But clearly, because the supply was coming through India, from COVAX, but through India, through COVAX to our countries, and the variants in India caused a big problem there. They have closed up, they have banned any exports of vaccines from there. What it needs now for us to see surplus vaccines given by countries that have surplus. And the Biden administration has done the right thing in that connection. Maybe more countries are doing it. Perhaps Ngozi will comment on that. Certainly think about how do you get more supply through either expanded to increase manufacturing through the pharmaceuticals that exist now, how quickly it will be to transfer technology to other countries to enable them to manufacture, as in the case of Johnson & Johnson. Those are all of the things supplied. And then the supply chain, to ensure the efficiency in moving the supply, from the point of manufacture to the point of storage, to the point of distribution in the country, and to make sure that there's an efficiency supply chain there is something that also need to be addressed. And finally, for me, compliance. There has to be leadership encouraging people in some of our countries to take the vaccines even when available. because there's been some confusion about AstraZeneca that has caused many people to get fearful. They've been afraid of going, so we need leadership in countries to take a stand, to tell them that it's safe to do, is in their own interest and for their lives and the lives of others to do so. So Ngozi, maybe you can add to that.
Well, thank you. I don't want to hog the floor, so I'll be very quick. Our two younger sisters who have given some wonderful talks as well. Thank you so much. Maybe you want to come in. I'll just say a quick thing to complement what Her Excellency said. That is to make the point that vaccine policy is economic policy. It's not just about Africa getting access to vaccines. It is what will happen to the world if vaccine equity is not assured. I'll just give you a couple of quick numbers. The IMF just did a study that shows that if we spend an additional $50 billion, to bring vaccination globally to 40% this year and up to 60% next year, the world will gain an additional $9 trillion in terms of economic output. 9 trillion. Just compare the two numbers. And as a finance minister, 1 trillion we can raise in additional taxes because of the way the economy will recover. But if we don't do that, it's going to be the opposite. We will lose tremendous amounts, not to count the lives that will be lost. So the issue is, we shouldn't even think of it as let's open up and get access and equity to Africa. It's let's do it because it's in the self-interest, health-wise and economic-wise for the world. So that's all I want to say. The numbers speak for themselves, and we just need to get going. More doses will be coming from France, Sweden, EU. All of them have pledged, keeping our fingers crossed. As one of the people who designed COVAX, I hope that the undermining of COVAX by bidding away vaccine supplies will stop and we'll have more coming in. Thank you.
But thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. I gave him a little longer time since he's sitting in for Mr. McCall. But let me ask the members going forward, please don't use 4 minutes and 30 seconds of your time and then ask to get the answer in the 5 minutes that you have, so that we can give every member an opportunity to ask a question. I will now go to Samantha, who will call on additional members by seniority, alternating between Democrats and Republicans. Each member will have 5 minutes to try to ask a question and get an answer so we can get to as many members as possible. Thank you, Samantha.
Thank you, Chair Meeks. Our next member is Representative Connolly.
Thank you, Samantha, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I will take your guidance seriously. I want to thank our panel, and I want to welcome, good to see President Johnson Sirleaf again. My question is about China. China has clearly expanded its influence and its desire for influence in very concrete ways throughout the African continent. What is your perspective about the role of China? Is it constructive? Is it something we ought to be worried about? Is it something you're worried about? I'd like your views because China's doing infrastructure, China's doing financing, China's making vaccines available. China has created its own multilateral development bank, and it has really upped its involvement and investment in Africa in a very dramatic way.
We're not worried about China. We're more worried about the European Union and the United States. Those are our long-standing, traditional, historical partners. We need for them to be with us. China has come in, China has provided resources for infrastructure, for this, for that. But we know today we have leaders who have the capacity, we have young people with the technical training to be able to ensure that whatever they do in accordance with our laws and our policies. But that's not the answer. The answer is for us to see our traditional partners take a more active role in our economy, particularly assisting us to solve our infrastructure problems like energy, roads, transportation systems, so that we have more regional integration, our AfCFTA can work, and we can attract private capital for manufacturing to make us stronger. Then we don't need China.
No, I think our younger sisters should comment.
Our younger sisters can comment on that.
Rama and Isis, don't you want to comment?
You know, it is such an important question, and I think what we're seeing is, you know, China's influence beyond infrastructure. There is, and I think one of the key strengths of the U.S., and I agree, I think that we just need to see a lot more investment and trade from the U.S., but China is going beyond infrastructure, and there is kind of this soft power cultural exchange programs that you see in the technology industry for some of the very large tech companies in China, you know, both trying to support entrepreneurs in different way, find their influence beyond, you know, beyond pure infrastructure. I think it's something to watch out for, but I think at the same time, it's an area of such strength in terms of cultural exchange from the U.S. and the ability of the U.S., it was mentioned earlier, to be investing in some of the other industries, including creative and sports, like the NBA, big announcements that have been made. So I think that that's something I just wanted to share, that it is going beyond infrastructure.
Yeah, true.
Yes, just to add something, you know, I think that Africa is interesting, China or not China. I mean, it seems there's a sort of reflection that consists of thinking that we should have a look on the African continent because Chinese are coming. But even if Chinese were not coming, Africa is worthwhile, you know, because it is really a strategic continent for itself. I mean, it is, before the pandemic, it was the home of half of the world's most dynamic economies. That's a lot. A quarter of this humanity will be African in 2050. That's huge. They are future consumers, future clients. This continent is building the largest free trade area in the world. That's a lot. The middle class will reach the billion in 20 or 30 years, the decades, sorry. And it is the you know, the hub of green technologies, which is so important for the climate change. And it is also the hub of an alternative multilateralism. Yes, driven by global new powers like China, but not only China. Don't forget the other global powers who are in the African continent. I mean, China is in a bold move with Russia, for example. They have now their own IMF, their own World Bank. That's why it is so important to promote an African seat at the, you know, a permanent African seat for the Security Council of the United Nations. Otherwise, it will be too late, you know. So, and it is as I say, it is the oldest continent. It is the youngest continent. And in this double capacity, Africa has a lot to say. So for me, it's not about, like President Johnson Sirleaf said, it's not about China. It's not even about the United States or Europe, it's about Africa itself. And it's not.
Session is so vital for U.S. Interests. And so I thank the chairman for pulling this roundtable together. You know, I'm a former union organizer and a longtime human rights advocate. And my number one question when discussing free trade agreements is this: how are workers being protected? How can we make sure that strong protections are in place and are enforceable and actually enforced, so that one trade partner cannot gain an advantage over another, and especially so that workers are not exploited. So Dr. Okonjo-Iweala, let me ask you this. What can you tell us about the safeguards in place to make sure that there is not this sort of a race to the bottom in the new African continental free trade area?
And Doctor had to leave, so she dropped.
Oh dear,
off.
okay.
So
I'm sorry, I had to step out and miss that. Do others are involved wish to address that? Or shall I move on to my next?
Maybe
Happy to.
Isis, Isis, would you like to address that?
I think I don't have like a ton of expert information about workers' rights, apart from it certainly being, top of kind of many conversations around, protecting rights and what are the kind of policies around wages. So I don't have something very specific, but it's certainly something that that is important, and it'd be great to see if the other panelists have more specific, perspective on this.
Well, we can move on. It's my bad. I didn't realize that she'd left. If anybody does, I'm happy to hear it, but I'm happy to ask a different question as well, either way.
Let us take note of that, Congressman, and come back to you on that so we make sure we gave you the facts.
Thank you. That would be wonderful. Thank you. Well, let me shift gears and ask you about this. There's so much talk about, and frankly, a lot of political leaders in the United States address the Chinese and the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative in particular with great anxiety, with a kind of defensiveness and reactiveness, I think. And instead, I think we ought to have a very different approach, a broad-shouldered, big-hearted American approach that looks to our friends in Africa, say, in a spirit of equality and friendship, and say, oh my gosh, climate change is an existential crisis. Let's look at all the offshore wind resource. Let's look at the onshore wind resource. Let's look at the solar resource. Let's have an American-African partnership, a continental initiative for us to create a lot of great American jobs, a lot of great jobs in our friends in Africa, those countries, to produce everything we need to help African countries produce all the electricity they need, kind of skip, there's whole areas, right, that may not have had reliable 24/7 electricity. Let's have smart grids everywhere with locally produced renewable energy. And wouldn't that be a better kind of approach for the United States? So Ambassador Yade, or any of you, I wonder what your thoughts are about that.
Well, quickly, I think there's room for collaboration among China, the European Union, the United States, and others through the multilateral facilities like the multilateral banks, where they could scale up the support for Africa, targeting specific things. Rather than it be bilateral, it can go through the multilateral institutions, as it does right now, but it could be scaled up, and that cooperation can address some of Africa's big problems relating to infrastructure. Maybe someday we'll see that kind of collaboration, even on a bilateral basis. Several countries coming together, with a program that's large enough, that addresses major African problems. It could happen.
Okay, thank you. It looks like
your time has expired.
I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Levin. Our next member is Representative Houlihan.
Are you all able to hear me?
Yes.
Great, and thank you. This has been a really remarkable panel, and it's really compelling to see such an amazing group of women here and have the opportunity to talk to you about such an important continent. I have so many questions and I'm trying to narrow them down. I guess I have questions in the sustainable business space. I'm really interested in a lot of the comments that each of you have made about the importance of investing in the for-profit sector rather than aid or humanitarian efforts or nonprofit NGO efforts. And so I'd like to dive a little bit more deeply into that and the opportunity that the continent has to understand how they can be part of the environmental, social, and governance movement or the ESG movement, how businesses can be more involved in understanding the impact that they will have as they're growing on the continent, beyond just being profitable, but also being good to the people and to the planet. And I think this it kind of springboards off of Representative Levin's comments. And so I was wondering if, and I don't know whom to aim this at, but maybe ISIS and Ms. Madison, what is going on to make sure that we're helping new businesses on the continent understand the impact that they can have beyond just the bottom line, and making sure that they understand that they can be part of the force for good and change as well.
Right, and thank you for the question. I think certainly there's a lot of early stage companies do have kind of social impact. There's a big social impact, particularly in East Africa, but beyond that as well, in terms of looking at what are the besides kind of the core business, what else in terms of supporting is our business doing to be inclusive, whether it's from a socioeconomic perspective and who you serve. Building products for customers across the socioeconomic level. So I think there's a very strong, particular awareness here that has also been, there's been a lot of, I would say, kind of, if you look at the grant funding or social impact investment, there's quite a bit of it, and it's continuing to grow. Different funds that are specifically focused on social impact also means that there's access to capital specifically around that. So it's certainly something of high awareness here. I think that what is very top of mind, and something that actually Representative Levin made me think about, is that we have such a significant number. I think it's between 10 and 16 million young people come into the workforce each year, and there aren't that many jobs. There are not 16 million jobs waiting for them. So I think that job creation is something that is quite important to even very small businesses. It's like, what kind of people are very proud of the number of jobs that they're creating, even if we're talking at an SME level. So I think there's a lot of awareness around this.
Thank you. And I guess my next question, and again, I'm not certain to whom to address this to, maybe Ambassador Yade. You mentioned quite a bit, and I agree on the emphasis and importance of culture and tourism, and it being a very, very small part of the GDP. My question has to do with what resources or support could we be helpful with at this time to be able to spur growth in that area?
Thank you for your very good question. How to solve this? It can be a win-win partnership, like I said previously. What I mean is that, we know everything about the American soft power. It works very well in Europe after the World War II. But we know less about the African soft power. And all this, it's about, like I said, it's about a universal message. It's about tourism. It's about women. It's about a lot of things. But it's also about markets, creative industrial markets. So it will require support. Of course, why not an American fund for African creative industries? Like it could be a part of the African economic takeoff. I think that's important. But what is more important is what you said previously, like ISIS, how we can mobilize the American and European private sector on this, on those markets. Because what is at stake there? It's about job creation as well. Because the main challenge of the African continent, it's the African youth, the youngest population of the world, would not be a challenge if they get a job.
And with my
So-
remaining seconds, I just want to emphasize my gratitude for you to bringing up continually the importance of women and girls across the continent and across the world. And I will yield back, Mr. Chair. Thank you for my time.
Thank you, Samantha.
Thank you, Chair Meeks. We have finished our list of members at this time. So we are ready to close.
That is fantastic because I knew that 2 o'clock was going to be our deadline for Madam President also and to our other witnesses. Let me just say as we close today's roundtable, I really, really, really want to just take a moment to thank all of our distinguished guests. President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, of course, we thank you for all of your contributions, not only to the continent of Africa, but to the entire world and your leadership. It just means so much to us. Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, you know, what she in the position that you now have is just distinguished and setting the trend of showing that where we have diversity and especially the power of women in that slot, talking about economics is just tremendous. And we thank you. Ambassador Rama, Yade. Look, I'm so proud of you and thank you so very much and what you're doing because it is going to be really important of the United States and our allies in EU, particularly the France. And I talked to your ambassador yesterday, just talking about how we can partner together to make the continent a better, you know, and invest in it and look at it in a different way. So thank you for your contribution to today. And of course, Miss Isis Nyong'o Madison, you know, you're talking about bringing the corporate America and others doing business on the continent of Africa and your expertise, people that we need to, you know, I'm just thinking about that we can send your way to who's asking for advice on the best way to invest on the continent and what does it need. So thank you for joining us today, and all of your comments have been very enlightening and timely. So thank you so very much. And let me also thank, of course, Chairwoman Bass and Ranking Member Smith for their participation today. They have been a team that have worked on a long time basis for the betterment of the continent. And I also want to thank everyone on the committee, your active ongoing work on this committee to strengthen the bonds and friendship and mutually prosperity between the United States and the peoples of Africa. You know, as I said, coming as chair, I want to make sure that we put Africa, you know, up to the front burner of the full committee, working along with the subcommittee so that every committee member has the opportunity to understand the significance of the relationship between the United States and the countries of the continent of Africa. It is tremendous if we're going to look forward and think strategically, both for our own national security, but also for the economics and the economies of the world. The world is shrinking, it's smaller and smaller, and we become more interdependent upon one another in that regards, and trade and investment, I believe is the way to do it. So, you know, after hearing today's panelists speak about their optimism for the emerging economic powerhouse that is Africa, I become even more convinced than ever that it is an immediate and long-term interest of the United States to make sure that we are investing in Africa. So my hope is that through this strategic investment, cooperation, and relationships rooted in mutual respect, the United States and Africa and our European allies and others will reap many, many benefits for years to come. And Madam President, I think your words of saying, don't worry about China, let us just do what we're supposed to do with our European allies. The rest will take care of itself. Let's do it. You know, we should not be investing in Africa thinking about, oh, because of China. Let's invest in Africa because it's the right thing to do. That's what we should be doing. Not because what somebody else is doing or is not doing. Let's do it because it is the right thing to do. Thank you so very much. And this roundtable is now adjourned.
Thank you. Well said, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
And thanks to the young sisters.
Yes, thank you. Marvelous.